Ozzie in a Timely Manner, my self-proclaimed magnum opus. This story starts when I was animating episode 3, my personal favourite, as it featured the most screen time for Telai. In fact, the episode was more revolved around him even. The main cast were locked in a room due to their own foolishness, and their parents were out, so they couldn't do anything about it. Them exiting the room was actually what I was up to. Or so I thought. I was animating the big scene where Telai would make a name for himself, essentially. Animation was going well until suddenly KindMaster crashed. I thought nothing of it at first, as KindMaster has always been unstable. In fact, its unstableness has been the reason for many prior old Ozzie projects being cancelled, but I should have been more wary. I load the project file back up and all seems normal up until that scene. And yet I noticed something strange at the point I was animating. Afterwards, the scene where the cast escaped the room had animated itself somehow. I hadn't have imported the files in, yet if I went on Ibis Paint right now, they still wouldn't be done. But it was getting late and maybe I was hallucinating. I hadn't got much sleep the night prior, so I just went to bed and slept it off. I woke up the next day, fashionably late as always, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and after a drink of coffee I immediately went back to check on the episode. The scene was gone. Not only that, I noticed a text on the warning screen that was at 0% opacity. I turned up the opacity and it said 666 days since this project began development. Not knowing what to do, I deleted the text and came back to Ozzie after a couple hours of doing errands. By the time I had come back, the scene had returned. I looked at the timeline, they all had file names that matched with every other asset in the episode. I looked through the scene, everything seemed normal, so I went to the beginning of it and pressed play in what I can only assume was an act of morbid curiosity. The scene played out as normal. The Elliot parents came home and discovered that everyone was locked in the room and opened it for them. But it took a turn for the worse real quick. Instead of Evie and Tessa running out and hugging their parents, Evie was eating Tessa's face. But it couldn't have been the same Evie because he was on the floor, and so was Ozzie and Willie and Gus and Tito. This was someone else entirely, and despite me skimming through, there was no evidence of this file even in the project, so this couldn't have been any animation. The music and the TV static just wouldn't stop blaring, as I was forced to stare at this deformed visage of a character that was basically the pinnacle of innocence. One thing I did notice throughout my prolonged staring though is he had a hole in his head. A hole specifically where E.B. would have shot himself in the prior version of the season. Before my brain could fully comprehend that fact, however, text began flashing on screen. Steve Oliver's 23, Lanecaster Drive. But as soon as the clock struck midnight, I was kicked out of KindMaster. The first thing I did was look up the name, Steve Oliver's 23, Lanecaster Drive. He was found dead at 23 Lanecaster Drive 3.5 months ago, and his killer still hasn't been identified. It was reported that there was teeth marks around his face, similar to the way EB was eating Tessa's face. I immediately went back on KindMaster to look at the scene, but it was gone and hasn't reappeared since. A good year has passed now since that incident. Reportedly, Steve Oliver's killer still wasn't found, but based on a little bit I did see, I at least know how he died.
Mothman, there's no need to feel down, I said, Mothman. Lift that man off the ground, I said, Mothman. Because you're in a new town and there's kids to be abducted.